and the parking. We're creating an urban jungle with no green space, shade, or nature. Monster structures and parking lots cover the whole space, which naturally become even more ugly, disrespected, and uncared for, as you can see in the photo. Tonight I'm asking us to consider a few questions. Question 1, what greater incentive or requirement could be created to encourage leaving trees and green space on lots before or after construction? An example in my mind would be Oak Knoll, which was planned to keep trees on the building lots in mind. And look how nice it is to live there, not to mention how it holds higher property values than most areas in Rolla. Isn't this also important for our Public Works Department in terms of the fact that with mostly concrete surfaces, there's no water infiltrated into the soil and all that runoff is for us to deal with, creating issues with greater water management and flooding in the future? Shouldn't we be encouraging green spaces and rain gardens, not spaces fully covered in concrete? Second question, what more can we do to encourage structures that help create the essentials of an enjoyable place to live and live near? So I show in this other photo as another recent development that seems to fit in differently with the neighborhood. So one of the things I've noticed, and I just wanted to bring up, and I'm not sure this is the only solution, but I do believe that a limit on the height of these buildings, especially on lots adjacent to single-family homes, or some sort of design requirements that add character or beauty should be addressed. Now, not that this is the most beautiful thing, but I think it does fit in more with the neighborhood. I also want to mention, though, that this lot, even though it blends in more potentially with the neighborhood, it still has an awful lot of paved space and very little green space or trees. Okay, so those are kind of some questions I don't know if we could answer through our planning or public works, a little bit more of what we could do, but I have just a few more things that I wanted to bring up. So part of what goes with some of these things in my mind is some thoughts about growth. And one of the things I think about is, should growth for growth or profit's sake be the main driver for developing our town? Shouldn't actual livability and quality of life for those who are living here right now, current residents who have decided to call Rolla home, outweigh those? On a similar but separate note, separate line of thinking, but on a different topic, is how we have previously operated with our Rolla Regional Economic Commission. There's always been a focus on bringing in industry, manufacturing, or box stores to town to see large growth in jobs in our economy. Sometimes these have involved considerable tax breaks or incentives for those large companies. We've heard recently that the competition for these large manufacturing businesses to come here is getting stiffer and stiffer in our state's current economy. At the same time, we have heard that our best opportunities for growth and in adding one job at a time onto existing businesses or encouraging homegrown startup businesses, those partnered with research at MS&T will be a great example. Those companies and startups that are already invested in our community and we will get added benefit by the money being reinvested over and over again here by those resident owners. My main point here is that we may need to shift our thinking and perspective in a number of areas. Realizing that the way that things have always been done can become stagnant, and no longer focused on what is best for current and long-time residents. There are always alternative avenues to success, and we should be willing to explore them. Today, I sent everyone an article that I was forwarded recently that discusses the idea that we may need to shift our thinking and look from different perspectives to see what our priorities are and how to achieve them. So I just wanted to bring some of those things up. There's some things that like I said, when I walk around in town, I notice. And like I said, with not trying to pick on developers of the first property, but just making a point that we all do live here, we all do walk around and drive here, and what do we want for the future and how do we want that to feel? And we are part of those decisions. And I know we have some constraints based on what we can do with our planning and those kinds of things, but it would be interesting to look at what creative ways we could find to make places feel more enjoyable for people to be. And I think a concrete jungle with no green space and towering buildings next to single-family homes isn't one of those examples of people in our community would choose to live next to or near. And so I'll just leave it there.
So I'd like to just jump on that and say, I think that the neighborhood plan that the folks are working on in community development might address some of that. And if we are able to do neighborhood plans for other parts of the city, that perhaps that's one of those issues that will come up and that we can tailor to the different neighborhoods, and there might be different solutions for different parts of the city.
Sure. And I don't know if we'd have just a couple more minutes. I don't know if Tom would be willing to just address the two questions, really, which is our...
Can I address the second one? I don't think the second one's within Tom's purview, but
okay.
the
Sure.
economic development. So let me deal with that one. Let me deal with the first one and then
Okay.
turn it over to Tom.
Okay.
You know, and I would agree with you on both points. You know, I don't like to see a lot of big concrete slabs any more than the next person does. However, to go down that path is going to take a council with a fair amount of backbone, because the reality of it is people come here and there's always pressure on you to make a decision to waive this, waive that, because the land is so expensive and nobody could make a single-family home work anymore, particularly in some of the areas of the city. So it's doable, but you're going to have the will to tough it out on those zoning classifications.
And
things
this would
like
be an example that's not single family. Somebody did do a number of units, but it does actually fit in a little better with the neighborhood, even though it's still a lot of concrete.
that. Looks a hell of a lot nicer.
Looks better.
It looks a hell of a lot
Also,
nicer.
have to keep in mind that some of the housing is built for student housing, and it's affordable housing.
Yeah.
And, excuse me, if you, aesthetically, it's hard to argue. Density-wise, though, I think there's a demand for that. And so demand is gonna be a major contributor.
You could also argue that demand would go down in places where that is, especially when it looks junky or ugly, and over 20 years when the person who developed it, like, hey, I've made my money on it and I can let it deteriorate. I mean, I see a lot of those around town too. So
Yeah.
there's two sides of that coin. Where we do want to make it affordable. It would be interesting to see the affordability and price per square foot of something like this versus the taller building. But I mean, I don't disagree with you. Those things should be thought about, but there's other things in the future that come along with that if we do decide to go down that path of just kind of the big structures that are super cheap and kind of ugly, but hey, that's the most affordable. It may mean something 10, 20, 30 years from now that I'm kind of mentioning, that we can think about the now and, you know, yearly or quarterly profits, or we can think about what do we want for 20 or 30 years from now. And I would argue if we don't have something where we're thinking about those types of things, we might end up with areas that just look like that. And I certainly wouldn't want to like go strolling or walking or hanging out in those kinds of places if they're just concrete jungle and it's hot and there's no trees and et cetera.
Jody makes a good point in that study that we're embarking on. That could be a microcosm to look at these things, and it's one of the most likely areas to go through redevelopment in the next couple of years anyway. So if the city wants to experiment on that concept, that's probably the place to do it.
Sure, and I think both of these are happening. The first one isn't right there, but they're both in Ward 1, areas where obviously a lot of this development's going on. So I know that the topic's being discussed.
Yeah.
And I just figured I'd bring up some of those points that I think are going to probably get discussed more at those meetings too. But,
I also think, David, we did change some zoning regulations.
John, you might put your mic down.
We did, I believe, change some zoning regulations after the first picture you showed. I think we've made some changes since that was built, I think.
Yeah,
I
we
think we
did.
require offsets, something a little more similar to this.
right.
It didn't quite go that far, but when we
Yeah.
did these attached single-family homes, which is how those are really being constructed, although used as multifamily, we now require a separate roof line and a facade element. But it
Right.
didn't go into great
Gotcha.
architectural flair, but
Right.
Right.
it was the idea of breaking up that one standing wall. So it doesn't get as this look. This is a one-story,
Yeah.
you know, certainly more compatible in the residential area. But the other one was to try and bring at least a little bit of character to a building
Sure.
other than just a blank wall.
And so not to belabor it or to get too deep in the discussion, because I do think a lot of these are going to be taken care of with the community discussions that are happening with Tom. But if it would be all right for Tom, if he has any input, I'd just be curious to have an idea based on a planning and zoning view, what things are potentially possible, for example, encouraging, even if you're not forcing people to, encouraging green space potentially, or the other one, which is about the aesthetics, which it sounds like we have done changes before too. So what's our purview and availability to either do something or not do something with those?
There's a lot that can be done. I'll just start by saying there is currently in the code almost no architectural or design requirements as far as a lot of this stuff. About the only thing there is what was mentioned about the townhouses. So right now, people are pretty much free to do what they want. I believe there's plenty of room to start small with a couple of requirements and see what people can stomach. I think if we go too big, too fast, we'll get too much pushback and end up where it started.
Right.
So to do that, I've read through the whole zoning code, and I've got many ideas. To properly go through and address a lot of this, there's so many things are interrelated. What I think really needs to happen is just a complete rewrite of the zoning code. The backbone of the zoning code was written about 30 or 40 years ago, and it was stolen from somebody else to begin with, and so it's cobbled together and band-aided for decades. So it really just needs a proper take a look back and fix all the things that are kind of left hanging and things like that. And then have a larger discussion about what we feel that we can try to change toward the better. I definitely think that when it comes to design, what things look like from the street, I think it should be a very high priority. Things that you can't perceive from the street, I believe, should be a much lower priority. And I've brought that up before.
Is there anything green space related that cities have done to at least encourage, even if we aren't like forcing you to plant 5 trees or have some green space? It does seem like we're more interested in seeing lots of concrete parking lots than we are of encouraging a green space, but I didn't know what techniques are.
I don't think we're encouraging because we want to see concrete. I think it's just it's a result of the zoning.
Right, the result of how strongly you want to push. So right now, there's plenty of cities that require parking in the back if there's an alley, for example.
There you go.
And some parts of town do have alleys. So there are some cities that will not let you have a driveway on the street in that case. There are cities that do outright limit the amount of pavement in the front yard in front of the house. Did that in where I came from. That was a requirement in a certain part of the city. So lots of things can be done, but it comes down to, are you willing to stand up for it?
Right. And the other, I know in a lot of these things, maybe with the green space is something where you could encourage, like carrot versus stick, you could maybe encourage people, hey, if there's some sort of extra thing, people to get rewarded for by leaving a little extra green or planting a tree when they're done or something,
Well, and something along those lines, Christian County used to, I don't know what they still do, they used to have this thing, whole different type of zoning, they called performance-based zoning. And basically what they did is they said, here's the things we'd like to see, and you've got to do 5 out of the 10 things. You pick. And as long as you do it, you can build on the property. And so, as far as encouragement goes, you could say, here's the types of things we'd like to see. Maybe you do need to pave the whole front yard, but maybe on either side you plant a big tree or something like that.
Okay. Appreciate you giving us a little bit of ideas there. And like I said, and like you're saying, I'm sure we're going to see a lot more talk of this kind of stuff at those meetings too. So thanks for your time on that.
Let me address the second one, and that is the economic development. There's a number of things changing with how we approach economic development. Some is because of our own volition. Some of it is reality. Very few big box stores are being built today. We know the reason for that. It's not likely as a city we could afford any huge financial incentives like TIFs and things like that. Not going to say we would never do one, but they would have to be pretty special. I don't think it's just a run-of-the-mill, we're going to get another retailer here and let's throw $1 million at them type of thing. So changing retail market, changing ability on our side as far as what we can afford and what we can't afford is having us shift agreements to some degree. even the companies that we look to try and entice to come to Rolla, the reality of it is we don't have very much land left. Our industrial park, meaning High Point, is almost full, and the RRC board has spent many conversations in the last couple of years as far as what is the future of that. The reality of it is the city is surrounded by a lot of land, and that's developable and for sale. The problem is to convert that into site-ready ability, it takes millions of dollars to run infrastructure, meaning roads, sewer, water, electric, and things like that. It's far beyond the abilities that we have, and it's very, very speculative, so it's not like the bank's going to lend somebody to do it, and it's not likely that somebody's going to make those millions of dollars in investments and then sit there and wait till we recruit a company. That's a reality. So it's changed our focus a little bit to look less at these big manufacturers, these big employers, and start to look for much more smaller entities. We also don't have the labor market, at least within the periphery. So the emphasis now is on smaller companies. We can debate whether that's 50 employees or 100 employees, but it's not 1,000 employees in all likelihood. 2 weeks ago, there was a meeting with two of the House representatives in Rolla, and the meeting was hosted by REC and had the hospital, the city, MS&T, and MOSI present. And we used that opportunity to talk about things that would enable us to make these affordable investments. Because you're right, the economic driver in Rolla is the hospital and MS&T. So we want to focus on our strengths. We want to focus on the research, which they're doing, but you got to make that bridge, right? You invent the greatest thing in the world and put a patent on it. Doesn't mean anybody wants to buy it. Doesn't mean you could build a building or anything like that. So getting that segue between the intellectual property that the university continues to churn out and get that into first stage, which is an incubator, and then the next stage, which is development or pre-commercial and then commercial, that's a pathway that we want to build our economic development on. However, we go back to those dollars on what it's going to take. So the case that we made to our representative is that there are no dollars really allocated for those kind of programs, and a lot of the economic development incentives, like it or not, are geared to these big employers and these big boxes. So the case that we've presented was to say, hey, look, we're not the only one. Rolla's not the only one in Missouri that has this opportunity but doesn't have the land, and how we can afford the millions of dollars. So that was the case that we made as far as redirecting our economic development agenda, if you will. John, do you want to add to that, or?
No, I think you covered it. That's good.
Okay.
The main thing I would just add to that is, I think besides those startups, which I think that what the university wants to do, the new chancellor, is absolutely great. I mean, if we can have some more MOSIs and brewer sciences and really capitalize on what's going on there for the economy here, that's great.
But
one
that's a
thing-
piece.
that's a
Understand,
piece, right.
understand that the MOSIs and the brewer science are
Right.
one of 1,000.
Sure.
So you can't build your whole emphasis on
No.
that happening. That's a piece.
Right, and so actually I wanted to mention what I see as another piece based on also what Sindra has mentioned before. Just highlighting again that it does sound like a lot of the new jobs that are coming into our local economies statewide are jobs of something, let's say Cohen Woodworking, where they have 50 employees or 70 employees, and they now are going to add 10 more because they are doing such a good job and they're building, they're growing that. Or I just use them as one example, but any other business, a small business on downtown on Pine Street could be an example where, hey, things are happening so well there now, they're able to hire another employee or two. And so I think this is a great opportunity and a great time to be able to realize that, hey, we're not going to get any of these big things coming in probably, but we can really cultivate those smaller possibilities of, you know what, one person added in 50 different businesses is still 50 more jobs and is still growing our economy and helping our town. So, and those people probably are, if they're from here and hired from here, they're more likely to, like we said before, you know, donate to some of the teams and donate to some of the local things going on. So it kind of could strengthen our community by having that segment as well.
That's what we want to do, but the tools available are not really designed for those kind of things. So a
Right.
small manufacturer like Cohen, there's Chapter 100 bonds, and that might be it, right, as far as a tool?
You could do community development block grant if they were doing an expansion. I mean, there are a few things, but they
There's a
really
few,
can't-
but they're
yeah.
not many. But anyway, it's on our radar. It's on our radar. Any other council comments? Comments for the good of the order? There are no closed sessions tonight, so meeting adjourned.
Okay, yeah, could have been.
David, I had a goal for 7. I couldn't